Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session as part of the World Circular Economy Forum 2025, hosted by Deloitte and Circular Economy Consulting on boundary setting and scope setting in the circular economy. You can see that there are more people joining us in the coming minutes. We're starting right on time, and I'll just start now, first with some of the housekeeping rules. This webinar is planned to last about 60 minutes. It might be a bit shorter, it might be a bit longer. We'll have to see how interactive we can make this session and how much time we'll need to answer all the questions. We are therefore very open to questions, so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat to the others here, to post any questions you might have to me, to the panelists today, other speakers. The more interactive we can get it, the better. We are more than happy to share the slides and the recording of this webinar after today's session, and we'll be looking forward to any responses you have to that as well. And to be able to do that, we'll be recording today's session as well. You as audience will not be visible in that, but you will be able to receive a recording. So, without further ado, let me start with an introduction to today's session. And today's session is really about how businesses can really use the circular economy as a strategy to de-risk their business or to capture opportunities. And this is why we are working in this field. This is why Deloitte and Circular Economy are partnering up on this. And well, most of you who are working with businesses or are business working in the circular economy will recognize what's on the slide here. There's a lot of drivers bringing you into that are driving you to actually adopt circular economy as a business, but it's not easy. There are complex change processes. There's new technology needed, new innovations needed, new business models needed, and all the while the data and intelligence that you need to really drive decisions are sometimes lacking. And today we're really diving into that last bit where it's really about data, getting the right data, sharing the right data across across your value chain and with others, and of course then also making appropriate choices from that. And that's where we're going to focus today. And I'm very happy to have you all joining us today for that. I'm going to be hosting you today at the first bit of today's session. I'm Jacco Jochemsen. I'm director at Circular Economy Consulting. Circular Economy is a non-for-profit organization that's been working to accelerate the circular economy transition for about 15 years. And we're still working with a lot of partners and businesses today to do that. I'm going to be setting the scene today for you. First, to talk a little bit how new standards, new measurement frameworks, new regulations are really pushing the agenda, putting circular economy higher on the corporate agenda, but also presenting new challenges and new questions to businesses, to ESG professionals within these businesses, and to decision makers. I'll be laying the land, and then I'll be handing over to my colleague, Diewertje Ewods from Deloitte, to talk to our panelists today, who will be giving the practical insights of how that's working in their business, in their daily operations. And as said, also during my presentation, feel free to use the chat to ask any questions, and we'll try and get back to you on those. So first, setting the scene. It's not been a long time ago that we started measuring on a global scale on the circular economy. Some of the first attempts were in the 2015s, 2016s, with some first organizations proposing metrics for businesses. We as Circular Economy started the Circularity Gap metric, which is a global metric on circular economy, in 2018. That in 2020, the World Business Council came with the CTI, the Circular Transition Indicators, which is currently in the fourth, almost fifth edition of these indicators. And those are one of the most widely used indicators in businesses right now, but they're not the only ones out there. The GRI has their indicators in the GRI 306 mostly. Alan Carden Foundation also added it into the mix with Circulytics. Unfortunately, that stopped by now, but was also a major driver for a lot of businesses to measure that performance. So there's been a lot of different frameworks and a lot of growing, a lot of maturing of these indicators over the years, and a growing number of businesses using these type of indicators and these kind of metrics to inform decisions. Those were all the voluntary schemes. And what we see now is that it's reaching legislation. And there are, on the screen right now, you see the prime examples from Europe with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the EU taxonomy, but others are following suit. For instance, we're hosting this webinar from Brazil, and Brazil will also be introducing its own sustainability taxonomy in the coming year. So other regions are following suit. And what you see here is that circular economy is reaching this kind of maturity that it's also part of these kind of legislations. And not only that, you see it's also one of the more prominent topics in there. There's been some research last year from the University of Cologne on companies that have to report on the CSRD. And you see that besides climate change, which is an obligatory topic for every company that has to report on the CSRD, circular economy is the second most important environmental topic to report upon. So that shows that it's seen as a more relevant topic to most businesses than topics like biodiversity, water, or pollution. So we see it's definitely on the corporate agenda now. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that we have no issues here. And this is an example I've used before. This is an example from the sustainability report of Microsoft Devices from a couple of years back. And I have to give them a compliment. So they were one of the first to actually not just do the measurement, but even without any obligation to it, also publish about it. So they do deserve compliments for that. And they used the CTI, the circular transition indicators that I just mentioned. And they did the assessment together with a consultant for their firm. And they established that they're somewhere between 22 and 25% circular, which is a pretty good score. I definitely have to give them that. But then they said that is a really good score because it's way higher than the global average at that point, which was the 8.6%. And that's where things went wrong. And I don't blame them because this is where the confusion arises. The problem is that the CTI indicators that they've been using, they've been comparing that to the circularity gap metric. And while that is a very similar indicator, there's one big difference, and that is the scope of the assessment. The circular transition indicators you measure on the basis of your own company, your own inflows, your own outflows. The circularity gap metric is about everything, your whole value chain. So in this case, Microsoft was comparing apples and oranges, if you like. So they were comparing their own performance to what should have at least been the performance of their whole value chain, because then that's a comparable metric to the global average. And in their case, that would have been a lower metric because there's more waste occurring upstream for them, which they didn't count in their metric. And it's a very understandable mistake that they compared these two metrics, which have very different system boundaries. You could say it's scope 1 or scope 3 if you've compared in greenhouse gas emissions. Because no of these legislations actually were trying to explain this difference or give any guidance on the scope setting. That is changing nowadays, and I'm happy to say that. There is now efforts to not just introduce new frameworks of measurements and legislation, but actually to harmonize those. This year or last year, actually, the first ISO standard emerged on circular economy in a circular economy performance measurement, who already tried to harmonize some of these efforts. But they only succeeded halfway, and that's because an ISO standard obviously has to work with the consensus of all the stakeholders in there. And on some of these issues, there is no consensus yet. So some of these gaps definitely remained. And there's a new effort there as well. The Global Circularity Protocol is is in development right now. You can compare it to what the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is for climate change mitigation. The Global Circularity Protocol is aiming to be that for circular economy. It's in development by the same type of parties that have been developing the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, namely the World Business Council and the UN, the One Planet Network within the UN. Is due to be launched later this year, and it's definitely trying to harmonize all these efforts here, fill some of the gaps, so it's going to be a more harmonized system and less confusing amongst businesses. So I'm very happy to see that, and today's presentation is definitely also meant as us presenting a little bit of what our thinking is right now, what we've been working on, in hopes that other organizations like the ISO, like the Global Circularity Protocol, can benefit from us sharing those insights today. As most of you will be aware, if you're working in this sector for a while, is that if you want to report on circular economy and circular economy metrics, you have to do that with another type of methodology than what we've used to. It's not financial accounting, it's not greenhouse gas accounting, it's material flow analysis or material flow accounting. And that's a bit of a different beast, and you'll see that in some of the conversations we'll have with our panelists today. And there are quite some steps involved, and you can see a 7-step framework here that we've taken from the Circular Transition Indicator guidance, the CTI guidance. And today we're really going to focus on that first step, how to properly scope any assessment as a business, a material flow analysis, to report on whatever framework, whatever legislation out there. Some of you who have been working in related fields like greenhouse gas accounting know that scoping actually matters a lot. It really depends on what kind of scope you set to what kind of outcomes you'll get and what kind of decisions you can make. And here are just some examples of what kind of scope decisions you will have to make when doing a material flow analysis. First of all, and that's already a difference with greenhouse gas accounting, is what is the time frame that you're looking into? Because materials flow. You don't measure them at one given point of time. They flow through a value chain, through a system. And are you measuring all the flows within a certain snapshot, say a certain year? Are you measuring all the flows that are related to a single use phase? Like you sell your product to a customer, they use it once, and then it reached end of use. Is that what you're measuring? Or are you measuring the whole life cycle of a material from the day it's extracted, from the day that it reaches end of life and it's wasted somewhere? That's just one choice you'll have to make. Then also, what is the unit of analysis that you're doing? Is that a certain resource, a certain material in your product? Is it the whole product? Is it the operations of your facility, of your company? Or are you measuring the performance of the entire company? And then where you're focusing on, which flows do you include? Of course, you will include mostly the material flows, but which material flows do you do all? Do you just metals? Do you just the biomass that you're looking at, or a specific flow that has your interest because it's a very material topic to your business? Do you include energy sources, energy carriers? Do you include the emissions that go out to air, to water? Or are you just focusing on the physical outputs, the solid outputs that you have? Are you including the water cycle, etc.? And it's very important that you decide and communicate that, because that will impact your metric. But then the system boundaries already gave you that example where Microsoft, with all their good intentions, kind of missed that certain metrics have very different system boundaries. And that's where we're going to focus most of our discussion today, because this is where we also have been struggling for a couple of years, both at Deloitte and at Circular Economy. And we were trying to fix that, and we started that initiative over a year ago. We had a couple of projects where this was becoming important. We worked with the financial sector where they were having this question. We launched the Circularity Gap Report on a yearly basis, where it became very important to be very clear on what kind of system boundaries there's there. We worked with businesses who had similar questions. So we sat together over a year ago, and we started kind of trying to draw out how that could work. And today is our opportunity to tell you what kind of drawings, what kind of pictures we've been drawing since then, and also to hand it over to whoever wants to bring this further forward. And this is our current thinking and our current idea. And this is very much also inspired with how the Greenhouse Gas Protocol defined their scopes. And I'll go from A to D, and we deliberately chose the names Scope A to Scope D to not be too confusing with Scopes 1, 2, and 3 in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and sometimes the Scope 4 that others also add to that. So the Scopes A, B, C, and D are somewhat different from those scopes, and you'll see how. If you look at Scope A, it's the most simple one out there. It's basically, as a business, it's your interactions with the environment. No other businesses involved. It's either you extracting something from the environment, or from ecosystems, or from the earth, or you putting something back out there in the environment, whether that's emissions, whether that is wastewater going out of the business, or any nutrients going back to an ecosystem from your business. That's very simple. You'll have the data on that one yourself. It's just you go to your operations manager and they should be able to tell what's going in or out of the facility. Scope B is also still in any materials that are in direct control, but other businesses are involved. Basically, it's your suppliers for the inflows. They supply you materials, you buy them. It's in their direct control because you decide to buy them, but it's coming from another business. Or it's what output you have to other businesses. So what you are providing to your customers, what you are handing over to your waste manager, whatever the outflow is. That's Scope B. Now it gets a bit more complicated with Scope C because that's your value chain. So that's the whole upstream value chain, the whole downstream value chain. You can, of course, also choose to only do one of those two. And that means that you're also going to look at what's happening upstream, sometimes very far upstream. What kind of waste is being produced where the materials are extracted, or where they're processing it into the raw materials that I need. And of course, sometimes for some businesses, that's wildly important, just like Scope 3 emissions can be the majority of your impact in greenhouse gas emissions. Some businesses will have the majority of their waste or their impacts related to material flows happening in Scope C. And then the last one, the most tricky one, is Scope D. This is where you don't have direct control, you don't even have indirect control, you just have some influence on the wider economic system. So maybe you're providing a product to your customer that allows them to run their business differently, whether that's a software, whether that's a material that impacts their productivity. So any impact you have on your customers, any impacts you have on your wider economic system, that falls into Scope D. And you can see these scopes go from where you have direct control and it's easy to collect data, and where you also might have a higher responsibility to act, to where you only have indirect control or influence, and where it's really about a wider ecosystem having to work together to improve. And I'll just have an example before I hand over to the businesses who will make it much more tangible. I'm sure I'll do have an example to make this very technical issue a bit more tangible already. And this is where we are talking about a wheat farm. So a farm, just a farmer out there that's trying to do good by not just farming a high quality product, but also doing that in harmony with his environment and in harmony with his value chain. So he is trying to see what kind of inflows and outflows do I have, and where do I have some control or influence to improve. And in Scope A, it's quite an easy one. That's all the materials it's extracting or putting back into its field. It's the wheat that it extracts from its field, but it's also the nutrients it's the farmer is putting out into the field. No other businesses involved, it's just the farmer in its field having interactions with the ecosystem. With Scope B, it's the interaction the farmer has with its direct suppliers, for instance, the equipment, the harvesting equipment it buys, or the things it sells to its customers, the wheat it sells off to anyone who wants to produce food from that. That's Scope B. It still has quite a direct control because the farmer will decide what kind of equipment it will buy, for instance. Scope C is further up and down the value chain in his case. So that will be all the mining waste that is produced and all the processing waste that is produced to make the equipment that the farmer has. In their case, maybe not the most easy one to influence for a farmer, but it's also whatever the downstream value chain does with its wheat and every byproduct that comes from there. And Scope D, which is, like I said, it's outside of the value chain of the farmer. It's only where it can influence things, but it has some big impacts there. So, for instance, the farmer might have some byproducts from the fields that it's harvesting, and it might actually realize that it can sell these byproducts to be a substitute for building materials, a sustainable substitute for building materials. So actually, in that way, it's impacting other value chains like concrete, where we actually might need less concrete. So there's avoided resource use in the concrete value chain because of what the farmer is doing. It's not his value chain. It's not even where he has a lot of impact or control, but by selling off its byproducts, it has avoided resource use in other value chains, and that's Scope D. So I hope that already makes it a little bit more clear to you. I think that was my introduction. I know this has been a bit of a ride already from all the standards out there to how to set scopes for your material flow analysis to this boundary setting, our suggestion for how boundary setting could work for businesses. And I'm very happy that we have a couple of businesses here today who have been with us on this journey to test this and to provide us with some commentary on how to do this. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Diewertje Ewelds, my colleague from Deloitte, who's been on this journey with me for quite a while now and is going to guide you through the next part of today's session.
Yes, thank you, Jacco, and very happy to be here. Great to see so many people in the call. So my name is Diewertje Ewelds. I lead the circular economy practice for Deloitte in the Netherlands, part of our global circularity team. And as Jacco mentioned, very happy to be working with him on this in the past year to really bring the thinking on boundaries to the circularity space. With me, we have three great panelists. And as Jacco said, we brought them here to bring some color to our circular economy scopes. We have Thomas Marianelli from the head of Sustainable Innovation and Design from Signify, Fabian Waterlet from JLR, Circular Strategy Manager, and Pau Huguet, Head of Sustainability, Energy, Infrastructure and Marine Businesses from Hempel. With each one of them, we will deep dive into their circular solution and how the boundaries help them to measure and to show the different impacts they have in the different scopes. So let's start with Thomas.
Hi, Diewertje.
Hey, Thomas. Great being here. First of all, let's start with briefly explaining your circular solution. And I'm sure that Jacco in the background will switch to the next slide for this as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. Can you explain briefly what Signify's Light as a Service entails?
Yeah, first of all, great to be here and happy to share. Well, Signify is former Philips Lighting, and it is a lighting company. So probably most of the people know them from producing luminaires and light sources and maybe also components. But you can say more than a decade ago, we were thinking about other business models. And the one we chose here for this case study is Light as a Service, whereby we can say that the customer doesn't have to buy the equipment, the lighting equipment, but is paying for the performance. So the light which comes out of the installation, and it is a nice example of a case on the left side where you see a production area. The lighting is then not bought by the customer, but it is paying for the light and the performance. And the responsibility of this stays with the company, with us, with Signify.
Great. And of course, there are multiple angles to a solution like this, a product as a service solution. And to understand what the impact might be on material use, on circularity of materials, we compared your Light as a Service scenario to a linear scenario. So linear sales, let's say the original one where you would just sell your product and then it's out of sight, out of mind. The customer will dispose of it at end of life, but you have no idea what's happening to it. So those are the two scenarios that we looked at: linear sales versus Light as a Service. If we first zoom into scope B, as Jacco said, those are the inflows and outflows to an organization. Can you share what the impact was on what we see is the impact that your circular solution has? And for those of you also online, we have tried to model that. One disclaimer: all of the numbers that you're seeing here, a lot of assumptions in the back. We will also share a point of view where we explain more about the assumptions, but notice these are all modelings and all comparable scenarios, not per se how the situation already is. But yeah, to show what the differences are between the scenarios.
So absolutely. Yeah. So let's say in this case study, you have to choose your boundaries, right? And as Jacco explained, you have scope A, B, C, D. And we said already at the beginning of our case study, A is really that we, as Signify, are mining our own materials to make the equipment. We don't. So we didn't look at scope A, and the same we can say from scope C, because directly seeing what the last does for the user, that's also out of this scope. So we really look at scope B and C as explained by Jacco before. And what does it mean? So linear sales, so we sell to the market, and it now really depends. It depends very much on where you are in the world. But you could say in average, as we report also in the annual report, is yes, in a linear sales, we also have certain materials will be recycled, right? But in the model of light as a service, we will definitely have more because we get returns, especially from professional customers. We expect in the coming years to get more products back. So you can either reuse components of this product in your next product, or you have control over what you get back. You can bring to your partners. Partner in this chain can be reverse logistics and recycling. So you can expect in this scenario that you are getting materials back which you can reuse again. Of course, this is in a scenario thinking.
Yeah, and I think what we show here as well is that really helps to improve the circularity of of especially the inflows and the outflows of Signify. So by having that control, really understanding what is in the materials will give you a better recycling, but of course also reusing components, etc. So I think from a scope B perspective, it's pretty clear what that does. But of course, if you use more circular materials, that translates into a larger impact on scope C. Could you explain more on that?
I think that's particularly interesting because as a company, as also explained by Jacco, you have most vision you have on your direct, say the next step in your chain. What you look at here when you compare them B and C is that in scope C, then you are looking at, okay, when I look more upstream, if I use more materials, more regained materials in the light as a service model, you will need to ask less upstream from those who are preparing these materials and maybe also make parts for you. So you're less dependent on or you are not less dependent, but you need less of what is happening in the upstream, meaning that I have less need for ores to be mined for refining process, which all cost a lot of energy, and which pretty normal. In an operation, you always have waste. So when I need less, my impact in scope C will be expectedly even bigger than the improvement in scope B. I hope I explained it a little bit clearly.
I think so. As said, there's a lot of assumptions going back here. We have also more explanation also in the in a broader article that we're sharing. But I think for now, for the time that you have, very well explanation. And thanks for sharing this. After we zoom into each of the three case studies, we will bring the group together. So if you have any questions for Thomas or one of the other case studies, please drop them in the chat, and we will get to that after we look into each individual circular solution first. So secondly, JLR. I think also a very interesting study, and thanks Fabian for joining, where we were looking at repurposing batteries coming from the Jaguar car, so the electrical vehicle. As you can already see, different graphs on the slide, but can you start with sharing what JLR does with the batteries and why is that so special?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me today. Really pleased to be here. So in 2018, we have put on the market the Jaguar I-Pace, which was the first electric vehicle of the brand. And after a while, we had some of these batteries coming back, or the entire vehicles coming back. So one of the options that we had, instead of going directly to recycling is actually to find partners to reuse these batteries or to repurpose these batteries into another product. So we worked with a partner which is called White Engineering, who have used these battery packs all together to create a larger storage capacity as a stationary system, and to basically allow smoothing the electric production from solar panels in this case. So you can imagine that when there's a lot of solar power being produced, it might be too much to take in the grid, in the electricity grid. So that sort of stationary system then would take the electricity to avoid putting them on the grid at that specific moment, and when there is more demand and less sun, for example, being producing electricity, then it can be used on the network again. So that's basically the solution we have come up together with our partner.
I think this is great because, of course, the amount of electric vehicles that are currently being sold is still rising, and we need to definitely, in the energy transition, use electricity to the best extent and also use renewable energy. Of course, if you look at the batteries, they hold a lot of critical raw materials. And one of the purposes, of course, within circular economy is to maximize also the material value and the resource value. And I think with this case, where you take a battery which is still functioning but potentially not good enough anymore to, give the performance needed for a car, but still very well functioning, putting them in a battery energy storage system extends the lifetime of the battery a lot, and also therefore increases the value that we are deriving from these materials. So we looked at the material productivity, and can you explain what it is that we analyzed in this particular case?
So basically, by selling the vehicle, obviously we are making some profit on the sale, but that includes the whole vehicle, including the battery. What happens when the battery comes back? Instead of going straight onto recycling, which currently still represents a cost, you can repurpose it and then potentially either sell that battery or lease that battery. It's not really defined, and I can't even remember what had happened. I think it was sold in this case with this partner. So that means it's actually an additional profit, an additional amount of money that you are generating, amount of value that you are generating for the business. So instead of having a cost which will inevitably happen at end of life, because even if these batteries are being repurposed during a set amount of time, eventually they'll need to be recycled. You are then able to extract more value from the same amount of materials that was created originally.
Yeah, and I think this holds true, of course, for JLR. But also if you look at the wider value chain, so these would be materials in your scope C, your partner, of course, also needs to do activities. So there's a broader benefit for the entire value chain, not just for you. And we show that on the first graph here. So it's a bit of a waterfall chart. As mentioned, it's for illustration purposes only, but it does show that there is additional revenue to be made with the same materials. The second thing that we looked at in this case is the resource use in scope D. Comparing your scenario with a scenario that users of the battery energy storage system would need to purchase a new battery, but now they're using a repurposed battery from the Jaguar, there will be avoided materials. Can you explain the audience how that shows in the numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to distinguish between the materials that are extracted for the purpose of creating and manufacturing the battery. That is not going to change for JLR. However, for the partner in this case, that would be using repurposed batteries, we could assume that by buying a repurposed battery, they are not actually buying a new battery for which additional materials would need to be extracted. So there is an avoided impact in the sense that they are using a battery that is already existing, of which the materials have already been extracted, instead of having to source a new battery with the new materials that come with it. But really a clear distinction between the fact that it has maybe a less of an impact on JLR value chain, because we will still need to extract these materials, and the one of our partner, which then benefits from basically materials that are already in circulation.
And in the graph that we're showing here, we are showing the resource use per year. And in the assumption that we made is that we'll double the lifetime of the battery. So that's why you also see that halving of the scope, in scope C, halving of the materials, because it's the same number of materials, but then instead used 8 years, it's used 16 years. So that's why you see a drop there. But indeed, the clear reduction or the avoided materials in the alternative BESS value chain, and BESS is the battery energy storage system. So I think this case clearly shows that you can have an impact with your product beyond your direct value chain, but in the wider economic system. And I think with that, and again, a question to the audience, if you have other things you would like Fabian to elaborate on, please drop them in the chat. But let's deep dive into the third case study that we have from Hempel, and welcoming Pau here as well to the stage. Thank you. I'm going to say Hempel is all about Scope D, but let's first look at your solution and how Hempel's coatings benefit clients.
Thanks, Duce. Yeah, Hempel is a global coatings manufacturer. We produce coatings that basically beautify, protect, and provide efficiency to the assets we value, from, let's say, our houses, stadiums, railway stations, to actually energy infrastructure such as wind turbines. We will talk about protective coatings. They protect the steel of the built assets against corrosion from the effect of the corrosion, allowing them to resist even the harshest conditions. So basically, by providing better quality coatings with Hempel's cutting-edge technologies, we allow to build a sustainable and resilient infrastructure that basically requires less maintenance and lasts longer.
Yeah, and I think that is probably music to everyone's ears who has assets, less maintenance, and it will last longer. We again also looked at Scope B for Hempel and Scope D. If we first zoom in Scope B, which what are some of the assumptions that we made here to really show that the impact for Hempel doesn't lie in reporting only on Scope B, which is currently asked by a lot of CSRD, for instance, by the CSRD reporting, but actually beyond. So a bit of an exaggeration perhaps here on the slide, but just to show the difference between your coating and just an alternative non-high performing coating.
Thanks. No, as Jaco said earlier, right? Scope B is rather straightforward. This is our operational control, right? So it's easy to measure and easy to manage. Basically Scope B for a company like ours, it consists of two parts, right? One is the feedstock, the raw materials we purchase, resins, pigments, additives, fillers, etc. And we convert that into products and manufacturing waste. So these are basically the input and output flows we need to deal with. For the case of studies you mentioned, we considered basically the case of that high performance coatings would require more input than regular coatings. And while, as you said, this is not necessarily the case, that helped us to contextualize the impact of the manufacturing activities versus the value we provide through the value chain.
Okay. Yeah. So in the assumption that we made is that the high performance coating would use more materials. So if you would then actually report on this from CSRD, it would look like your coating would be less preferable because, yeah, you're using more material. So it would be more resource intensive. So, well, perhaps not the best one to use. So it clearly doesn't tell the whole impact story. That's to be found within Scope D. So can you elaborate on that? And also, I think you have some very practical examples and real case examples you're already applying this to for years.
Yes, exactly. Basically, when we contextualize the scope B and C into the broader scope B, we include the impact of the avoided resource consumption. So basically, these are the materials that we don't need to consume due to the better protection of the infrastructure. These could be materials that basically steel that is not replaced, or material or new assets that doesn't need to be built because we extend the lifetime of the existing one. With this, and as you can see in the picture, right, we can contextualize, we can demonstrate that the avoided impact is much larger than the actual impact from manufacturing or even from the value chain, and it's by orders of magnitude, right? So really, like when we put things into context, we understand that performance pays off, that durability pays off, that circularity pays off. I think, as Fabian was mentioning now, I think it's worth highlighting that Scope D relates very much to our partners, to our customers, right? So this is not only for Hempel, this is for our customers, and this is for society at broader. But in general, the Scope D, I think, in the picture we see here is like what we can conclude is that the Scope D is fundamental to offer this life cycle perspective and be able to manage the trade-off between their own value chain and what happens beyond that.
Yeah, and I think, of course, we zoom in very much on the material use, but as you can imagine, often reduce material use, and in this case, especially for your clients, delayed maintenance because you don't need it right away, also has a much a monetary input as well, and that relates again to the fact that we want to use the materials to maximize value. Thank you, Pau, also for the explanation of your solution. Let's bring everyone together. So, and then we have a couple of questions we would like to ask you and have a bit of a discussion about. So yes, so Thomas, Fabian, Pau, all here. Bit of an overall reaction first. We've gone through this assessment. What are some of the key benefits that you are seeing on measuring the impact of your products in these different scopes? And I think the first one started talking. Just go ahead. The first one who wants.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think for me, about it was clarifying in the sense that we saw three very different applications, right? Three different circularity strategies in place, and to me was a good learning to understand how the scopes relate differently to the different solutions, right? So it's information, which is very important to be able to then customize, apply, and communicate the strategies we put in place.
Yeah. Thomas or Fabian, any thoughts from your ends?
Go ahead,
Well,
Fabian.
Hopefully, this is a potential solution to provide more transparency as well in terms of external communication. I think Jaco mentioned several frameworks where large companies have to report, and being able to refer to the exact scopes where we've measured different items is really important, I think, and certainly something that we haven't necessarily seen from a circularity point of view. So to me, that's really a key element.
Yeah, and I maybe to add to it is indeed when you, and it's not only for our company, but we are active in circularity for a long time, which is focused indeed around your own activities, say it like that. And now for the transparency you are mentioning, Fabian, I think it's very interesting, but it means that you really have to get the data, that's always limitation, but to get the data really upstream, because it will be very dependent on where, for example, ore is mined and where it's refined, to really include this also in the total calculation. And that's what Jaco said in the beginning. Many models look at a part of the value chain, and of course it's very interesting to see the total impact. And that would be when we can get more insights, accurate insights in this, that will be interesting.
I think if we draw the parallel to the greenhouse gas emissions, I think when, first of all, of course, Scope 3 was introduced, no one had any clue on how to get data across the whole value chain. So, and with circularity, it's much more than just the emissions that you need to calculate. So, I'm fully recognizing that this is going to be one of the key challenges in implementing a boundary framework that is applying the boundaries. Are there any other challenges you see to applying different scopes? Perhaps Fabian?
In terms of, I would say being able to clearly identify in which scope different stakeholders might fall. Certainly for an industry like the automotive industry, we've got 7 or 8 tier layers. So sometimes it will be difficult to exactly understand in which of the scope these will be located. So I'm sure there's going to need a little bit of refinement, but that will come with time, with practice, and with the implementation, really.
Maybe also another dimension that was a little bit in the question I received is the financials behind it. I think that's very interesting as well.
Well, please elaborate on that if you.
Well, it's something which, at least the time I could spend on it, I have not had the time to deep dive in it. But well, in everything we do, what my experience is, and I'm more than 20 years now in sustainability, is we have to always find a balance between all the benefits we bring to planet and also to the people, but definitely also to profit. So if you could say the things I adapt in my strategic modeling, and you really find also financial benefits next to planet benefits, that's something which would drive this kind of models to be implemented worldwide.
Yeah, and I think, of course, looking at scaling certain solution, it's always easier to scale something if the business case is positive. That generates more investment, and usually also if there's a positive business case for the clients as well, it also drives the adoption of your product.
Absolutely.
And I think especially if you indeed can articulate, of course, benefits to a business case, financial benefits can be direct profit or direct revenue, but it could also be reduced dependency on certain materials, reduced supply chain volatility. And what for me stood out in doing all of these analysis is that the extended impact that you have is you are able to change the materials, to change the circularity of your materials flowing into your organization. The usually broadened effect you have within scope C in the total value chain helps to get to that more supply chain resilience. And I think that is one where also a lot of investors going forward, I think, would be very interested in learning how that works. And of course, also for companies to articulate their value to their clients with like the case, of course, for Hempel, with, okay, you're reducing maintenance, you're reducing material use because you can use your product longer. I think that is a clear business case for that. One thing that we also often get the question is the link between measuring not just environmental impacts, but also social impacts. And I think this is one where a lot of work still needs to be done. But we're wondering, and perhaps Fabian, if I can ask you, because of course within the batteries there are a lot of critical raw materials. Are you also measuring social impacts, for instance, that you might have if you are reusing those critical raw materials?
So there are many internal policies that we've put in place, obviously, because you have to comply with larger regulatory framework, including in terms of transparency, child labor, and so on and so on. So you can't really ignore that, and I think that applies to any company. Now, measuring the social impact as such is very difficult, especially if you consider that some the extraction of some materials might have indirect impact as well. So again, where does it stop, and where does it need to be? When does it need to enter into account or not? Is something we haven't really resolved, but we are improving our processes to ensure that we've got more and more transparency. And there are several consortia actually who have been working on upgrading the technology, and which you might have heard about. I'm not going to advertise that necessarily today, but that proves that I think in the near future we're going to have the ability to have far more transparency across the whole supply chain. Within the automotive industry, we're already capable of how can I say that, of giving or transporting the information all across the value chain, but the social impact is probably something which is difficult to measure. It's rather in terms of transparency, reporting, making sure we are doing the right thing, and more importantly, if there is something wrong, that we can stop it immediately.
And do you think that the scopes as proposed in the boundary framework will help you also to guide where does your responsibility lie more, or your influence and control lie more?
Probably, but it's also probably something which we can identify through the existing scope in the greenhouse gas protocols, because we can see where the biggest impacts are coming from, or the biggest volumes. So that would work hand in hand, I think.
Okay, clear. We also got a question from the audience. If you can comment on the economic competitiveness of the circular business model to the alternative scenario that we measured, and perhaps Thomas or Pau, for you as a question.
So in my case, for example, comparing this linear model versus the light as a service, it is, by the way, it's an interesting one, because we are practicing this different model for quite some time. It's also what with many of these new business models is, how do you get it across to your customers? So we have definitely cases of light as a service. It brings, next to financial benefits, in many cases, how do you say that in English? If you have the convenience that you have an installation in place, which has always, well, that's the goal, that you fulfill really the requirements from your customer, you get a regular visit, and the customer has a product which fully fulfills what the need is for the installation. So that's a gain. But what you see often is that the mindset from, we are used to CapEx, so I buy my installation, I buy my equipment, it's mine, it's clear, it's also clear in my books, everything. While the OpEx is for many still a challenge, say it like that. So I think when you, and I didn't do it myself, but if you would make the backside of your paper a calculation, I think you can come out, say, equal, or in certain cases, because if the service is really good, you have a gain.
Yeah.
Less downtime, better maintenance, things like that. But this in the naked numbers, I'm not familiar with that. Then I have to ask my financial people.
Okay. Pau, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on the differences, right? I think in our case, it's less of a different business model, right? So what we are presenting here is more business as usual, just focusing on different performance. And what we would see from a financial point of view is pretty much the same we see from an environmental and material point of view, right? So a distribution of impacts, distribution of value across value chain, the weight per example being much smaller than the weight for our customers. So the value that lies in, again, in durability, in conserving assets, is something that it brings also much more economic weight. But indeed, the complexities that Thomas was mentioning regarding new business models, we face them as well in other solutions. So I fully echo that.
Thank you so much. And I think this is all the time we have now, because I also really want to give the floor to our next speaker, Delphine Carrin from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So thank you all three for the panel. Very happy that Delphine is joining, and although I know that Delphine, you can speak also a lot about the financial parts and the financial importance of making circular economy solutions work. Today, it's really about the Circularity Protocol. I think what we can conclude from what we had, from the discussion we just had, is that focusing solely on scope B doesn't really represent a complete picture. It doesn't show the full story of the circular impact and performance that a company can have. So we need to consider scope D and scope C, but also importantly that everyone understands and speaks the same language and get alignment across companies, across sectors. Can you explain all the work that you are doing with the Global Circularity Protocol and how that will also aid the development of circular solutions globally?
Sure. Thank you very much, Dee. Thanks a lot. And it's a real pleasure to be in this session. And I really enjoyed listening to all the good examples from the companies on the use of boundaries. So maybe before I share on why boundaries are important, let me just say a few words about the Global Circularity Protocol that Jaco also mentioned earlier. So the Global Circularity Protocol is currently in development, so by WBCSD, the One Planet Network initiative from UNEP, from the United Nations Environment Programme, and also more than 80 organizations. So we will be launching the GCP, as we call it, in November this year at the Climate COP. And what the GCP is a voluntary framework that companies will be able to use to measure, manage, report, and disclose on their circularity performance. So the aim is really to have a common practice, a common language across companies of all sizes and from all geographies. The GCP is building on the WBCSD Circular Transition Indicators framework that also Jaco mentioned earlier when he set the scene. We have published the CTI framework since 2020. We have actually made a few announcements this week at the WCEF. We have published a sector guidance on building and construction, and also a new impact measurement on social issues. So you were just talking about the importance of social issues, Dee. We have published this framework that you can find online. Back to the GCP. So before we embarked on the development of the GCP, we did a landscape analysis last year. We reviewed what we call circularity-related corporate performance and accountability systems, so all the frameworks already out there. We really wanted to identify the gaps, the opportunities that could inform the development of the GCP. And one of the challenges that we identified to scale up of a circular economy was really the lack of transparency and accountability that companies need across their value chain to drive meaningful progress. So the tools that we have today, the standards, the frameworks, the methodologies, they just don't go far enough. They are too focused on what happens inside the organization, measuring only direct flows of materials in and out. But we know that companies do not operate in a bubble. Value is created and lost across the entire value chain. So if we only track what we control directly, we may miss major risk, blind spots, and the growth opportunity. So at the opposite, if companies expand their focus to include indirect flows and downstream impacts, they can increase accountability for resource use across the value chain, incentivize innovation that extends product life, reduce waste, and creates value beyond the point of sale. And also build stronger partnership with suppliers, customers, and even recyclers. So that was one of the recommendations from the landscape analysis of the GCP from last year. that we should provide clear definitions of material flows, including the scopes and boundaries of flows for which organizations are accountable. So this year, we are following this recommendation. As I said, we are working with more than 80 organizations, so including Deloitte and Circular Economy. And we are working on this boundary framework for the GCP. So at the moment, we are actually discussing the ABCD framework. So thank you very much, Deloitte and Circular Economy, because it's great that you have already put all the thinking and testing the ABCD framework with the companies. I think we heard very good example on this webinar today. And the topic is quite complex. It's more complex than the GHG protocol with scopes 1 to 3. You can add the 4th scope also. So we really need a boundaries framework that companies recognize as valuable and are really willing to use. So if anyone on the call is interested in learning more about GCP or get engaged into the development of the GCP, we are discussing the boundaries. So really feel free to reach out. Thank you very much. And I think it's back to Jaco, I guess.
Yeah, sorry, I had to find the unmute button. Always a bit of a challenge in these things. Thank you so much, Delphine, and very happy that you were willing to come in today and explain a little bit more where the GCP, the Global Circularity Protocol, is moving towards. And yeah, I'm very happy to hear that you have been that you feel that this is an interesting perspective on boundary setting, and that you're considering that with the wider group. That was exactly why we developed it. So for consideration for others to see if this is something that should be further developed. Yeah, and with that, we're reaching the end of today's webinar. I'm very happy to see how that many people have been tuning in today, and hoping, of course, to reach more people after today with the recording that we'll be publishing. Feel also free to engage with us after today, either with us, or if you have any questions to the panelists, or if you would like to follow up on Delphine's invitation to work with her on the GCP, please feel free to reach out to us. There is a couple of things that you can expect. As said, we'll be sharing the recording and the slides. We'll also try and summarize all of our thinking so far on scope setting, and it's absolutely work in progress. It's just where we have been with with our thoughts the last year when we were working on. We'll be publishing that shortly, so we'll also be sharing that with you once it's published. And then, of course, please do watch out for the launch of the Global Circularity Protocol later this year at COP, as Delphine just said, because that will also be a major step forward in this space. With that, all I have to do still is thank you for listening in and tuning in today. I'm really looking forward to further interactions in the coming period, and I hope you enjoyed today's workshop, and do check the other sessions today of the World Circular Economy Forum. Thank you so much, and enjoy your time today. Bye-bye.